A New England author wrote,
New England has a harsh climate, a barren soil, a rough and stormy coast, and yet we love it, even with a love passing that of dwellers in more favored regions.
New England is a region that has produced many significant writers of American literature. The writings reflect the land and its people. They reflect a history and a geography unique to New England. New England is a rugged land. Some New England writers drew inspiration from this aspect of their environment. William Cullen Bryant, in Thanatopsis, describes the land that was his home.
The hills, rock-ribbed and ancient as the sun. The vales, stretching in quiet pensiveness between. The venerable woods. Rivers that move in majesty, and the complaining brooks that make the meadows green, and poured round all, old ocean's gray and melancholy waste, are but the solemn decoration all of the great tomb of man.
Another of the writers of New England was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. He reminisced about his boyhood on the rugged coast of Maine.
I remember the black wharves and ships and the sea tossing free, and Spanish sailors with bearded lips, and the beauty and mystery of the ships, and the magic of the sea.
At Craigie House, his home in Cambridge, Longfellow put into words not only his impressions of New England, but also his own tender feelings. In the study of this house, now a literary shrine, Longfellow wrote many of his poems. In this room, Longfellow wrote The Children's Hour.
Between the dark and the daylight, when the night is beginning to lower, comes a pause in the day's occupations that is known as the Children's Hour.
The rugged New England weather was the inspiration for John Greenleaf Whittier's Snowbound. The poem is a picture of New England life in winter, as he remembered it from his own boyhood in this farmhouse. In Snowbound, we read of the poet's home and family. Around this hearth, the family gathered.
Shut in from all the world without, we sat the clean-winged hearth about, content to let the north wind roar.
In Snowbound, we read not only of the vigorous New England winter, but about the character of the people who lived in this environment. 19th century New England nurtured a hardy breed of people. The writers of that time developed philosophies that reflect that hardiness. From the group of writers centered around Concord, Massachusetts, came the philosophy of transcendentalism, a philosophy that said people must look beyond their material surroundings, search for right and truth within themselves, and become one with the universal spirit, the oversoul, their own concept of God. Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the Concord writers, embodied the spirit of transcendentalism in his poem, Each and All.
Over me soared the eternal sky, full of life and of deity. Beauty through my senses stole. I yielded myself to the perfect whole.
In the essay Self-Reliance, published in 1841, Emerson expresses another aspect of the hardy New England philosophy.
Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind.
In Concord stands the Old Manse, home of Nathaniel Hawthorne, another New England writer of the 19th century. Hawthorne embodies the hardy Puritan philosophy of the early New England settlers in short stories and novels, like The Scarlet Letter, the story of Hester Prynne, whose adulterous behavior offended the rigid Puritan community. The Scarlet Letter gives us a vivid picture of the character of the early Puritans, their stern moral code, and their strict concern with human behavior. This unbending morality became a part of New England culture and New England literature. Out of the ruggedness of the land and the hardy personal philosophies came another movement in 19th century New England, the development of an intellectual tradition that was uniquely American. Boston, which had been a focal point of the American Revolution in the 18th century, became the hub of America's academic and literary culture in the 19th century because of Harvard College. At Harvard, in nearby Cambridge, Emerson, Thoreau, Longfellow, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and James Russell Lowell were among the scholars and professors. An American intellectual independence emerged that stimulated New England writers as American political independence had done. Emerson expressed the ideal of freedom in his Concord hymn. Here at this bridge near Concord,
the embattled farmer stood and fired the shot heard round the world.
Familiar with historic landmarks, such as the old State House in Boston, New England writers deeply felt their heritage of freedom. As Emerson wrote,
"For what avail the plow or sail, or land or life, if freedom fail?"
In the poem, Old Ironsides, Oliver Wendell Holmes expressed his idea of freedom. The famous old ship becomes a symbol of the American struggle for freedom of the seas. In another poem of freedom, Paul Revere's Ride, we read of the Old North Church. Longfellow tells us of the signal lamps that were to be hung in this steeple to tell how the British were coming.
One if by land, and two if by sea.
Then, Revere sees one lamp in the steeple.
He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes, till full on his sight, a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath, from the pebbles, in passing, a spark struck out by a steed, flying fearless and fleet. That was all. And yet, through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night.
Walden Pond, a small lake near Concord, Massachusetts, draws its fame from another New England writer, Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau spent 2 years alone in a cabin by the pond, and in his book, Walden, described his observations of nature here as the seasons passed. In the solitude of the pond, Thoreau's examination of his thoughts and attitudes led to a political philosophy that glorified the individual. In his essay, Civil Disobedience, Thoreau wrote,
"That government is best, which governs least."
He believed we'd do best when left to our own resources. Out of the New England setting came 2 other writers who were separate from the Boston Concord group. Emily Dickinson spent most of her life secluded in her family home in Amherst, Massachusetts. Only 7 of her poems were published before her death in 1886, but she left nearly 2,000 of them unpublished. As the years passed, she turned her view more and more inward. Her poems are delicate, profound meditations on life and on the lonely world she inhabited. In her poem, Chartless, Dickinson reflects on seeing the world through one's imagination. I never saw a moor, I never saw the sea, yet know I how the heather looks and what a wave must be. I never spoke with God, nor visited in heaven, yet certain am I of the spot, as if the charts were given. Robert Frost was born in 1874, and most of his writing is from the 20th century. But he displays the same vitality and passion for individuality that characterized the 19th century New England writers. Frost's poem, Birches, is a prime example of the New Englander's strong bond with the environment and desire to lift the human soul to perfection.
Earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. I'd like to go by climbing a birch tree and climb black branches up a snow-white trunk toward heaven till the tree could bear no more, but dipped its top and set me down again.
Frost's poetry continues a tradition as old as American literature itself, a tradition of personal and political individuality, of love for God and nature, the tradition of the New England writer.